April 28, 1945. The village of Giulino di Mezzegra, Italy, sat silent beneath a gray sky. The war was all but over. The roads were littered with broken trucks, spent shell casings, and the smell of smoke drifting down from the mountains. Along a narrow lane beside Villa Belmonte, two figures were led to a wall. One, a man who once ruled a nation with fire in his voice. The other, a woman who refused to leave his side even as the world turned against him. A burst of gunfire shattered the stillness. When the echo faded, Benito Mussolini and Clara Petacci lay dead, the final act of Italy's fascist tragedy. But how did the man who promised to rebuild Rome's glory end here, bleeding against a cold wall in northern Italy? And why did a woman who could have lived choose instead to die beside him? To understand that moment, we must return to the beginning, to a nation fractured, desperate, and searching for someone to believe in. Italy, 1922. The Great War had left deep scars, empty stomachs, empty coffers, and the haunting silence of men who never came home. Cities like Turin, Milan, and Naples were boiling over with strikes and riots. Socialist uprisings clashed with conservative militias. The king's government was weak, drifting, unsure. Out of that chaos rose a man who called himself Il Duce, the leader. Benito Mussolini was not born into privilege. He was the son of a blacksmith and a schoolteacher, a man of contradictions. Part revolutionary, part opportunist, part dreamer. He had once been a socialist, even jailed for his beliefs, but he turned away from Marx and towards something new, something darker. He offered Italy not democracy, but order. Not freedom, but greatness. His followers, the black shirts, marched through the streets, smashing socialist offices and silencing opponents. Violence became politics, and fear became loyalty. Then came the moment that changed everything. October 1922, the March on Rome. Tens of thousands of black shirts gathered at the capital's edge, demanding power. It was less a battle than a show of force, but it worked. King Victor Emmanuel III, terrified of civil war, invited Mussolini to form a government. At just 39 years old, Mussolini became the youngest prime minister in Italian history. He walked into power wearing a tailored uniform and a calm smile, but beneath it was steel. Over the next few years, he dismantled Italy's fragile democracy piece by piece. Opposition newspapers were shut down. Political parties were outlawed. Journalists were beaten or disappeared. Parliament became theater. Real decisions were made behind closed doors. By 1925, he no longer bothered with pretense. Mussolini declared himself the Duce. Mussolini understood spectacle. He turned politics into performance. From the balcony of Palazzo Venezia, he delivered thunderous speeches to roaring crowds, his fist raised, his jaw set like a Roman statue. Cameras followed him everywhere, inspecting troops, harvesting wheat, driving race cars, flying airplanes. The message was clear. Mussolini was Italy. Posters showed him as tireless, heroic, almost superhuman. The truth was far different. His empire ran on propaganda, secret police, and terror. But for many Italians weary of chaos, it worked. The trains ran on time, the streets felt safe, and in the 1930s, Mussolini promised even more, a new Roman Empire. In 1935, he invaded Ethiopia. Italian troops used planes, tanks, and even chemical weapons to crush the poorly armed defenders. The world condemned him, but at home, crowds cheered. The victory inflated his ego and drew the attention of another rising dictator, Adolf Hitler. By 1939, the two men stood side by side in Berlin, signing the Pact of Steel. Italy and Germany were now bound by war and destiny. While Mussolini built his empire, his private life told another story. Married to Rachele Guidi, he kept her and their children out of the public eye. But there was another woman, one who adored him long before he noticed her. Clara Petacci was 20 years old when she first met Mussolini in 1932, outside the Vatican. She had admired him since she was a teenager, filling pages of her diary with his speeches and clippings. To Mussolini, her devotion was intoxicating. She treated him not as a politician, but as a god. By 1937, Clara became a constant shadow in his life. She dined with him, called him nightly, and followed him to official meetings. Mussolini rewarded her with gifts, homes, and influence. To his inner circle, she was a distraction. To him, she was escape. But as war clouds gathered, neither of them knew that devotion would soon seal both their fates. June 10th, 1940. Standing on a balcony before a sea of cheering Italians, Mussolini declared war on Britain and France. "Italy demands its place in the sun," he roared. But behind the triumph, Italy was not ready. The army lacked modern weapons, tanks, and even fuel. Soldiers marched with outdated rifles. Within months, Mussolini's dream of conquest began to collapse. His invasion of Greece in October 1940 was a disaster. Italian troops were thrown back into Albania. Hitler had to send in German divisions to rescue his ally. In North Africa, British forces routed Italian armies, taking tens of thousands prisoner. The myth of Mussolini's invincibility began to crumble. Then came Russia. In 1942, Italian divisions were sent to fight alongside the Germans at Stalingrad. Few returned. The snows of the Soviet steppe became their graves. Back home, the people grew restless. Bombings, hunger, and despair spread through every city. Even within the fascist party, whispers began, the Duchy had failed. By 1943, Italy was collapsing. Allied forces landed in Sicily that July, sweeping through the island in weeks. Panic seized Rome. On July 25th, Mussolini summoned his fascist Grand Council, hoping for reassurance. Instead, they turned on him. By nightfall, King Victor Emmanuel dismissed him and ordered his arrest. After 21 years in power, the Duce was now a prisoner. His empire, built on fear, had turned its back on him. Clara Petacci was also arrested, interrogated, and released soon after. Despite pleas from her family, she refused to abandon him. Her love had crossed the line from devotion to obsession. Mussolini's story could have ended there, in a quiet cell, forgotten by history. But another man refused to let it. Adolf Hitler, furious at his allies' downfall, launched a daring rescue. On September 12, 1943, German commandos led by Otto Skorzeny stormed the mountain hotel at Gran Sasso, where Mussolini was held. They landed in gliders, overpowered the guards, and carried him off by plane. Days later, Mussolini appeared beside Hitler, pale, shaken, but alive. His reward? A puppet regime in northern Italy, the Italian Social Republic, headquartered at Lake Garda. It was a shadow of his former power, controlled entirely by the Germans. But Mussolini, too broken to refuse, accepted. At the Villa Feltrinelli near Gargnano, he lived under guard, issuing decrees that meant nothing. His speeches grew weaker, his health declined. Yet through it all, Clara returned to him. Against all advice, she joined him at the villa. She brought warmth into his isolation, notes, affection, and unwavering faith. To her, Mussolini was not a fallen dictator, but a man of destiny betrayed by fate. She believed he would rise again. He, meanwhile, seemed haunted, a ghost of the Duce who once ruled Italy. By early 1945, the walls were closing in. Allied forces were advancing from the south. German troops were retreating. Partisan fighters controlled the mountains. Mussolini's puppet state was collapsing by the day. In April, news came that the Allies had reached Milan. For Mussolini, there was only one choice left: escape. On April 25th, he decided to flee north towards Switzerland, hoping to negotiate asylum or simply disappear. He disguised himself in a German greatcoat and helmet and joined a convoy of retreating troops. Clara refused to stay behind. She climbed into the car beside him, clutching his arm. Friends begged her not to go. She answered only, "If he dies, I die with him." The road north was chaos. Bombed bridges, partisan checkpoints, refugees, soldiers. Every village they passed glared in silence. Mussolini, once the master of Italy, now hid beneath a helmet, his face pale and expressionless. Witnesses later said he barely spoke. His hands trembled. His eyes were distant, as if he already knew his fate. April 27th, 1945. The convoy reached the small village of Dongo on Lake Como. Partisan fighters blocked the road, rifles raised. The Germans hesitated, knowing they were surrounded. The partisans began searching each vehicle, checking faces against a list of known fascist leaders. In the back of one truck, a young partisan named Urbano Lazzaro noticed a figure trying to hide beneath a blanket. The man's jawline, his eyes, they were unmistakable. He pulled the cover away. It was Mussolini. Lazzaro later said, "He looked spiritually dead." The dictator offered no resistance. Clara clung to him, begging the partisans not to hurt him. Her pleas were ignored. The Germans negotiated safe passage in exchange for handing over Mussolini and his companions. By nightfall, the Duce and his mistress were prisoners in Massacre. Mussolini spent his final night silent, slumped in a chair. Clara refused to leave his side. Outside, crowds were gathering. Word of his capture spread fast. In Milan, people celebrated in the streets. For them, this was justice. For him, it was the reckoning he had long feared. The next morning, April 28th, the end came swiftly. Partisan leader Walter Audizio, known as Colonel Valerio, received his orders. Execute Mussolini and Clara Petacci immediately. No trial, no delay. At around 4 p.m., a black car pulled up outside Villa Belmonte. Mussolini stepped out slowly, his coat hanging loosely, his face pale. Clara followed, refusing to let go of his hand. They were led to a stone wall beside the road. Audizio read a brief statement, then raised his submachine gun. Witnesses said Mussolini whispered, "Shoot me in the heart." Others claim he said nothing. When the gunfire erupted, the world that Mussolini had built in violence ended in it. Bullets struck his chest, and he fell instantly. Clara screamed and threw herself toward him. Audizio fired again. She collapsed beside him, her hand still reaching for his. In seconds, it was over. The man who had once made millions salute was now just another body in the dust. The woman who worshipped him lay at his side, but even death did not bring peace. On April 29th, the bodies of Mussolini, Clara, and several fascist officials were loaded onto trucks and driven to Milan. Their destination, Piazzale Loreto, the same square where, months earlier, fascists had executed 15 partisans. By morning, the crowd was already gathering. When the trucks arrived, the bodies were dumped onto the pavement. What followed was a frenzy of vengeance. Men and women screamed, spat, and kicked. Some struck the corpses with sticks. Children threw stones. Decades of fear and hunger and humiliation erupted in one chaotic outpouring. To control the mob, partisans hung the bodies upside down from the roof of a gas station. Mussolini and Clara swung side by side, his face swollen, her hair tangled, their bodies battered. A photographer captured the moment. The image would travel the world, the once mighty Duce reduced to a spectacle of shame. When American troops arrived hours later, they ordered the bodies taken down. Autopsies confirmed the obvious. Mussolini had been shot multiple times in the chest. Clara too had died instantly. Her family buried her quietly. Mussolini's remains, however, became a grim curiosity. They were buried, stolen, hidden, and finally returned years later to his hometown of Predappio, where some still visit his tomb to this day, a shrine of controversy and memory. News of his death traveled fast, all the way to Berlin. In his bunker, Adolf Hitler read the reports and stared at the photographs of Mussolini hanging upside down. Witnesses say he turned pale and said only, "So this is how they treat their Führer." 2 days later, Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives. He ordered their bodies burned. He would not give the world the satisfaction of a Piazzale Loreto in Berlin. Mussolini's end was more than the death of a dictator. It was the death of an illusion. He built his empire on spectacle, and it ended as spectacle. He wanted to be a modern Caesar, but he died a fugitive. His speeches promised glory, but his silence at the end said everything. And Clara, the woman who believed in him until the last breath, became part of the legend, proof that love can be as blinding as power. The wall at Giuliano di Massacre still stands. The stones are quiet now, the blood long gone. But history remembers, because every empire of fear eventually collapses under the weight of its own lies, and every tyrant, no matter how powerful, must one day face the people he once commanded.